Alright, everyone. Welcome back once again to the adventures of the Monk and the Monarch. With me, the Monarch, and my co-host, Mildra the Monk.
Hello.
Alright, so today, I'm gonna be talking one of my favorite anime directors, Shinichiro Watanabe. Most of you probably know him for Cowboy Bebop.
Yeah, you also mispronounced his first name.
I am not surprised about that.
It's Shinichiro, not Shinjiro.
Shinichiro, right.
Your favorite director, and you could get his name right.
Look, I watch all of his shit. That should be good enough.
Excuses, excuses.
That said, when I started looking a bit more into him before this episode, it was a little odd because my initial thing, just check Wikipedia real quick, get a quick overview. They had nothing about him prior to Macross listed there. And looking around, his pre-Macross career wasn't the most visible thing.
You're doing second unit art, and then you get moved to directing episodes, then you get moved to directing a whole series.
I did find interviews with him to finally find out what it was. It's a little different because he wasn't an art guy. He didn't do music. He started off what's the role called? He's basically the gopher. He's making sure people are on time, getting in touch with people, nothing involved with the creative process. Project manager, I think, is what we'd call it here stateside. His first step into actual creative stuff was directing episodes.
I'd say that, and I was gonna storyboard artist he did, but that was a little bit after. But that was a little bit after Macross, because Macross Plus was it.
But yeah, by most directors for at least anime, it seems like a bit of an odd path to go for any kind of directorial debut to be your first creative endeavors.
I guess Sunrise saw something in him because that was the studio he broke out.
Yeah. I believe it was the interview he did with Forbes where he was talking about quite a bit of this. He said he went out drinking a lot with his superiors.
Yeah, that tracks.
Yeah. It seems to be where he picked up a lot early on. And apparently his initial directorial debuts for just episodes left a big enough impression that he got handed Macross.
Which is amusing because Macross is not a Sunrise. That's Studio Nue. That's always been Studio Nue. Although getting into the history of Macross is not something I am drawn to do right now. Because if I do that, I'm gonna have to talk about Harmony Gold, and if I talk about Harmony Gold, I'm gonna get pissed off.
Maybe we'll save that for another episode down the line. But yeah, this is something we briefly brought up a bit before stream. And since it kind of starts with Macross Plus, might as well start it here. There is a pretty strong musical motif that you'll see in any of Watanabe's works. Now, I wouldn't say it's as prevalent in Macross as some of the others.
I would say, and to be fair, Macross Plus was a bit of a groundbreaker when it being an early adopter of computer tech. I realize that may ridiculous, and some people thinking, "Oh, integrate EG," but no. In the 90s, 2000s, you started to see, and we've talked about this multiple times on the show. In the 90s and the 2000s, you started to see the transition away from the hand-drawn approach into using instance for animation. Of course, the big one was DigiPaint in the 2000s, which was a learning experience. Especially when it came to television made, but let's not forget that there's a kind of a two-tier setup between, actually I'd say around this time it's television anime, OVAs, kind of, and film.
Now, one thing I'll note, I don't know if this is specifically true or not, but one of the things I was reading, Macross Plus was basically the first OVA to use a lot of CGI imagery. I don't know if that's technically true, but I think it's certainly at least among the first.
Yeah, when you're trying to find the first in these kind of always a trick there, but it is close.
Yeah. It is probably the first that did well, I think would be a good way to put it.
I'd say the if anything I'd say the music relationship that Watanabe would develop with Kokano. But there's also the fact that the a good chunk of the music was handled by the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra. And since Watanabe and Kano have worked together multiple times in the years since, that's as good a spot as any to bring. It is kind of amusing that it's considered an official sequel and essentially retconning Macross 2.
Yeah. Like, I also read that it's kind of just considered different timelines after the initial original Macross. One timeline it goes to Macross Plus, the other to Macross 2. I will say one thing that leaves discussing this as like a Watanabe work a little interesting is this was kind of the same interview he did at Forbes when he was talking about it. He didn't really see himself as the head director of this project. I wish I could
No,
remember the supervising director at the time, what his name was. It
Shoji
escaped me.
Kawamori.
Yeah. But he kind of said at the end of the day, this was a more Kajimori project than one of his own, despite
Pretty
how
much.
it got labeled.
Well, Shoji Kawamori is the guy is been the creator of Macross since day one.
So yeah, I really don't blame Watanabe for feeling that way. So that said, like, just moving on from Macross itself, we get kind of then what would be definitively both his first, like, major debut, and the thing I think people most associate with him, Cowboy Bebop.
I'd say this is where you get the muse with him because so much of bebop is rooted in the jazz era,
Yeah.
the jazz era of the '40s. And the thing about that era, and I know this may sound odd given how jazz these days has this reputation of being classy music or something like that. During the great jazz era, that style of music very counterculture, especially because of how it was eschewing traditional structures on how compositions. There's a lot of controlled chaos within jazz. And of course, there's other sides to that, but that's the reason why the term session is a thing. Why episodes are called sessions, because a jazz session is that kind of thing where everybody goes and improvises, see what they come up with.
I think you also see a lot of that musical motifs he has from jazz reflected, like, in the show itself. Not so much the music, but, like, the animation. It really, like, Watanabe is really good at matching the kind of music being played to what's going on screen.
Oh,
It really feels at home with all of the stuff in
we
Bebop.
talk a lot about on the Parliament of Geeks, the show on my channel. We've talked quite a bit about musical identity. When a show has it and when it what musical identity is a little bit but it is a case where the defining feature of it is if you can evoke some work just by listening to the music. And a lot of this does come down to not just the music itself but also how it's timed and edited. If you want an example of how these sorts of things can not be used, there's I look at Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus. It has a Mick Gordon score, so good. But because of how it's edited within the game, you don't get as much of a chance to experience. Am I making sense with that?
Oh, yeah. That said, yeah, Bebop definitely has a musical identity, and there's a lot of scenes, like, just hearing the song, you're going to immediately, like, picture what was going on in the show. Like, I can't listen to Greenbird without seeing Spike falling through the stained glass window.
I recently decided to go back and play a game of Spot the Reference various episodes.
Oh,
The
God.
two examples that I will use for this, because obviously I'm not going to go through. I'm not going to use all of the episodes for. Asteroid Blues is very much drawing upon Desperado. Point where Asimov's soul would be a stand-in for Antonio Banderas. Ballad of Fallen Angels is drawing Six of John Woo, and obviously the big one in that is going to be Hard Boiled.
Like, it's something interesting you're going to see with a lot of the references from just his series in general. He makes a lot of references and homages to American movies, even compared to, like, a lot of other anime directors.
Which is always why I find this east-west divide that anime fans and anime critics try and create interesting. Because if you look at a lot of directors and a lot of storytellers, this notion of drawing inspiration from Western media is not as uncommon as people.
Like, It was another thing I read out of some of the Watanabe interviews specifically. Like, he didn't really like Japanese, like, live action movies growing up. He got a
Oh,
lot more into, like, the American live action stuff and the Japanese animation. Not so much American animation and Japanese live action.
which to a certain extent I can understand. Uh,
I'm just saying, like, that kind of history he had with movies and animation, it reflects a lot in what you see in his work. And kind of why it looks a lot different than many other anime directors.
and in all fairness, there's never really been hop to Hollywood, to golden age Hollywood in terms that one area that that everybody's going and making movies. I mean, maybe you could say Tokyo, but I feel like that's a bit of stretch when everybody's going to Tokyo in one form or another, anyways.
I will say, though, it is kind of funny how much Watanabe seems to hate working with Hollywood.
Yeah,
Like,
although
this isn't just about the live action Bebop, which, yeah, he was really not happy with that one. But as far back as him working on the Animatrix,
yeah, the two shorts he did for the
yeah,
Animatrix.
like, apparently the first one he did, he didn't really have any issues working with, like, the guy who it was, but after a while, the guy he was working with got replaced with someone else who was kind of like the go-between between the Wachowskis and the people working on the Animatrix. He did not like that guy. Apparently, at one point, like during one of the last major meetings, he said, "If that dude shows up, I am going to punch him in the face." And the guy never showed up.
Yeah, and I'm trying to recall whether that issue, a detective story or a kid's story.
I'm not sure. I just know like his issue was like the guy didn't even care to like go back to the Wachowski brothers. He acted as if like he was the final say on what would happen, even though this wasn't even his project.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like middle management guys.
Yeah. But yeah, I
You
just
know,
think it's kind of funny how much Watanabe seems to hate working with Hollywood, where that kind of was the source of a lot of the inspiration he took for making a lot of his shows.
the other thing that I think is worth noting is with a lot of this, I'd say with rare exception, a lot of the stuff that he's done has been working on his own thing instead of working on other people's adaptations. I mean, he has done it, but it's in the minority compared to his.
Because I think, of course, Matt Cross was part of someone else's little project.
Yeah.
Little project. Animatrix, of course, Wachowski brothers. I'm trying to think of anything else he may have done that was like someone else's property that he wasn't spearheading.
Um, Kids on the Slope was based on a manga, and Tetsuan Birdie Decode is obviously an extent Birdie the Mighty, which is definitely not his creation. Ergo Proxy, she worked on for as a storyboard artist for one episode, was somebody else's project completely. Death Parade he was a unit director for the ending for, obviously was else's project, and with Sunny Boy he was just an advisor. And of course there was Black Lotus, but I would argue that the bigger voice, Blade Runner Black Lotus, was Shinji. If there's anybody who really is trying to push the use of the CG in anime, it's him.
Now, one other just like little weird thing I learned, and it's one of those things I don't know how common knowledge this ended up actually being, but one of the characters in Cowboy Bebop was entirely inspired by Yoko Kano herself.
Yeah, that tracks.
Care to guess which character that was?
I'm not even gonna try, because do you have any idea how little that narrows it down?
Ed. I don't know how I'd feel knowing someone took the inspiration for Ed from me. And I love Ed, don't get me wrong.
Like I said, that makes a bit more sense. Composers tend to be a few eggs short of a picnic, as it were.
Yes, I'm trying to remember which was the one that followed Bebop. I believe Shampoo.
Yeah, though it is noting that he had a few cups of coffee for Vision of Escaflowne 2 years afterwards.
Ah.
He was an episode director for a couple episodes, and he was a storyboard artist.
Only ever saw the movie for Escaflowne.
Escaflowne is an interesting in the sense that the anime and the manga are almost three completely different stories.
That's a little weird. I thought the movie was one of those things where it tried to like truncate a bunch of stuff down into one movie.
In a roundabout way, yes, but in terms of motif, they are very different from each other. The because the anime comes across as a fantasy anime that happens to have mecha. The movie, I'd say it feels less high fantasy and more sword and sorcery, especially with how much more violent it is. And the manga is doing those things, but seems to lean more into Maho shoujo, just in terms of its art style and characterization. And in all three of them, Von has his own quirks in terms of how he carries himself, and how some of the characters from the anime and the manga have the same name, but they don't even look the same.
Sounds like a very confusing beast.
About as confusing as all the different takes on Ghost in the Shell. So precedent.
Yeah, back to Watanabe though. Again, like that next thing, major project he got was Samurai Champloo, and we see that musical motif come back in an entirely different way here.
First off, R.I.P. Nujabes who's taken from us far too.
I completely missed that news.
Yeah, that was several years he had passed away, and he was in.
Oh wow. But yeah, with Champloo though, you see just a heavy influence on hip hop.
Well, do you know what Champloo means?
I do not.
Champloo is not a word you're going to see in regular Japanese. It's a word through the Okinawan dialect. It can mean things like to mix or mixed up, which I think is in why you get the approaches that you do. And what's even weirder, if we wanted to go with the thing of mixing up, is the PS2 game, which I still have, that was handled by Suda51.
Wait, there's a Suda51 Samurai Champloo game?
Yes.
How did I not know about this?
How indeed. One where your moveset is determined by these records that you have access
to. I'm gonna need to track this one down now. I love me some Suda51.
Yeah, it leads me to believe that there must have been. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when either Watanabe or Suda pitched the idea of doing this. Because it was very clear that he got the gist of what was saying something, because a lot of video games based on anime don't have the best track records.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot that are outright bad. They're just okayish.
Most of them just don't really feel right. Like, something's just off.
Of course, these days a lot of them end just being party fighters for shonen battle manga, which I'd have to blame the success that CyberConnect has had with that motif. And I know some people might bring up Gungrave, but Gungrave, the game came first, so that one doesn't really count.
Yeah.
But
go on.
One of the I suppose it's even more telling when it comes to that whole concept of mix, because if you recall, Mugen said that he is from Ryukyu. In the time period where that is, that's now Okinawa. That island, the longest time, had a bit of a reputation as a prison colony.
Certainly makes sense given Mugen's attitude in the anime.
I mean, you certainly have that, and his style definitely leans to him being a pirate. But the thing with that is you do have a bit of a travelogue style within that, and also there's one episode that is a case of, was somebody on drugs?
Look, there's a couple episodes like that.
Yeah, the Wasabi episode is the one that's on with that.
I immediately thought of the baseball episode.
Given Japan's obsession with baseball, that one doesn't shock me.
A baseball episode existing doesn't shock me. That episode was still really fucking weird. That was weirder than the mushroom tripping episode, I thought.
Well, that mushroom only get at the end, but something else I do with my experiences with Lou was leaning. It's kind of funny that he's talked about not being a fan of Japanese live action cinema because of how many there's plenty of times where a lot of Kurosawa style works gets the nod in that series. And yeah, if you're going to be doing something samurai related, then it's inevitable somebody's going to invoke Kurosawa.
Oh yeah. Still, like, I'm sure there are exceptions to that, not being as big a fan of live action Japanese films. But yeah, you do see like a lot in Champloo with just like how the characters are portrayed and the animation. He does take a lot of inspiration from like hip hop tropes and culture for designing the characters to match that music. He will commit to his musical motifs.
Yeah, no, certainly wrong with that.
Oh yeah. Like, I do think that's one of the biggest things that made a lot of his stuff stand out. Because, yes, other shows will have things like that, but it's not too often you see it like that central to how everything is made.
For me, I've always held the attitude that if you're gonna be doing things, it's best to commit.
Oh, yes. But yeah, from this one, I believe next in line was Space Dandy.
Not quite.
Not quite. Oh,
Kids on the Slope was the next one. That was in 2012. Space
right.
Dandy wouldn't be 2 years after. And I'd say with Kids on the Slope, that is him dipping once again into jazz, but instead of dipping in the counterculture era of jazz, it's into jazz meets classical. There's also a bit of a theme to the depiction of Catholicism in Japan, which is a complicated situation. But it's also worth noting that that one wasn't produced by Sun. It was produced by Mappa, and it was going to be on the artsy end of things because it was on the Noitamina block, which is a programming block on Fuji that tends to be more art house type of projects, as evidenced by, well, Noitamina is animation spelled backwards. But since dipping into jazz again, that meant with Yoko Kanno again.
I mean, why stop? Like, why not just keep doing what worked?
Truth be told, I do think of his Kids on the Slope is one gets overlooked by a lot of people, and I do think it deserves a second look.
I'll admit that is one I've not gotten around to watching yet.
And granted, I should note this is one of those cases where Watanabe only directed the anime. It was based on a manga that obviously he didn't do. The manga was done by Yuki Kodama.
That name I'm not.
Which is understandable. Like I said, it's I'm not gonna say it's some hidden. I do think in the conversations of his work, it's definitely one that isn't. And since it does mean Watanabe and Kano working together, it's worth exploring at the very least.
Oh yeah. So we go from Kids to the Slope. Now I believe we get to Space Dandy. I don't like Space Dandy.
You don't like booty?
That is fantastic. I saw the clips of him talking about booty before hearing anything else about that show. That's why I went in to watch it, because those were hilarious. Something about the show itself never grabbed me, though.
Space Dandy very very much it is diving headfirst into a lot of the pop culture of the I'd say the 1960s, especially given the spy craze of the 60s, and I cannot understate that enough. There was a big ass spy craze in the 60s, which would end up going again in the 2000s, but I digress. Even Doctor Who leaned a little bit spy around this time. This was the Pertwee.
One thing I will note about Space Dandy and just Watanabe's comments, like when he was talking about making it, he did not think anyone else was going to come out with an idea for like kind of the visual of a space-like show where a guy's still using cassette tapes, and while he's working on this, Guardians of the Galaxy drops.
Yeah, indeed. But so much of space, I think my familiarity with the type of science fiction, the type of pulp science fiction aesthetic from the 40s all the way through the 70s is part of the reason I was able to get what he was trying to do here.
Yeah. Like, in some ways, from what little I'd watched, it's a lot goofier than his other works. Don't get me wrong, that is not a bad thing. But it does kind of stand out in its own weird way. It's been a while. I may have to sit down and give this one another shot, though. I'm trying to think off the top of my head what was actually following Space Dandy.
See, after that was actually in the same year was Terror in Resonance.
Yes. Now, off the top of my head, I can't actually think of the musical motif of Terror in Resonance, if there was one.
Oh, there was. It was post rock and ambient. He cited Sigur Rós, which I know I'm mispronouncing the name, but in my defense, they're from Iceland. They're a very post rock kind of act.
Now that you say that, it becomes a bit more obvious.
In the same vein, Space Dandy is drawing upon new wave. Like I said, it's drawing upon old pulp style SF.
Now, like with Terror in Resonance, I felt a lot of people kind of slept on that one, at least compared to some of his other really big name projects.
I'd imagine because thematically speaking, it's Terror in Resonance is far more of a character piece of stuff he's done. Like if you look at Cowboy Bebop, Samurai Champloo, even Space Dandy to an extent, you have this motif present of a fairly static-ish character that is reacting to the world around them. Whereas Terror in Resonance is an element of a ensemble cast of characters.
Like, personally, that's probably my second favorite project of his, was Terror in Resonance. I
And
adored
once
it.
again, that project was on the Noitamina block. And it was the second time he worked on Mappa.
Now, since Terror in Resonance, what has he been working on, if anything?
After that, there was Carolyn Tuesday in 2019.
Ah,
which
right,
was
Carolyn Tuesday.
the chief director for. A lot of people are gonna remember that for the fucking bullshit song.
I love that song.
I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when that got pitched to the voice actors who were singing it.
Like,
Either
what?
that, or I could easily envision a scenario where they ended up singing it after doing multiple takes of something else,
And it was just better.
and Watanabe just said, "Fuck it, let's keep." Because the guy who would create Monster Mash, or his journey going that level of weird when he was part of a doo-wop band called the Diamonds. Out of boredom, one day he sang one of their Boris Karloff impression, and that just spun off into its own thing with time. Especially since everybody was trying to start a dance craze in the 50s. Look, it got pre Beatlemania 50s got real stupid. I'll put it that way.
Herman's Hermits were my boys. I can't believe Henry VIII was a #1 hit. But anyway.
A big reason why that particular focus so much on music is it was the 20th anniversary of Bones, and it was the 10th anniversary of the Flying Dog record label.
I have no idea what Flying Dog is.
They used to be known as Victor Entertainment, and have worked with a lot of artists that I know I recognize, and you probably will too. Let me think. And I should say they're part of Victor Entertainment. They were formerly M-Serve. They've been around since the 90s.
Okay, yeah, like, the names of the artists I don't remember, but as soon as I click on one and start seeing, like, the stuff they have worked on, I'm like, okay, I know a lot of this.
This is once again a case of dipping into. I'd say Carolyn Tuesday is still themed around music, but not themed around a specific genre like done in the past.
It's more in that one, like, music's the focus of your actual story, if I'm recalling what Carolyn Tuesday is correctly.
Yeah, I do know that I do remember having to in Mother's Basement's view of it, and he did a decent job, decent by his standards anyway. But then midway through, he decides to delve into year politics in it, and I tuned out at that point.
Look, at this point, if you suffer through that, that's your own problem for listening to Mother's Basement. You know what you're getting into.
It was in a group thing. I was playing nice. I do. It is kind of amusing that so much of it is built on that motif of pursuing the dream of being a musician. So they're heading out from their town.
I'm not surprised a project like that would appeal to Watanabe. Like, not just because all of his anime have those strong musical motifs, but that was actually one of the things he was considering doing with his life, was becoming a musician. He just came to the conclusion he wasn't very good at it.
Well, he has been a music producer for certain anime, so maybe he wasn't giving himself enough credit.
It's possible.
He did music production for Michiko to Hachin.
Yeah.
As well, he was a music advisor for Sunny Boy, and as well as a music for Mind Game, which is everyone should watch Mind Game at least. And one of these days we will have to talk about Yuasa.
Yeah, I know. I need to.
Weird.
I don't, like, I've only know what some of the stuff he's worked on is. I have somehow completely missed any of his actual work.
Did you see Devilman Crybaby?
No. Yeah, I know. I know he was behind that. I don't know how I kept missing this guy, because he's very prolific. He's got a lot of stuff. Never crossed the path. But yeah, with Watanabe, though, I know he wanted to be, like, an actual musician. Whether or not he would have been good at that, I don't know, but at the very least, he did learn. He is very good at, like, mixing the music with the animation. He just has an ear for how to set it.
He may have dropped any musical ambitions, but it's very clear he was still studying musical theory.
Oh yeah.
It is. Apparently, he was a director for one of the projects in Genius Party, but you have to put an asterisk on that because Genius Party was an anthology film made of a bunch of short films.
Yes. So another odd thing that I didn't realize until a short while before we started streaming this, Watanabe hasn't worked in as many projects as I thought he did. Like, he's got a name that's like so commonly known amongst all anime fans. It is a relatively short list of projects compared to some of the other very notable anime directors. It's more in line with like Satoshi Kon than some other name that's slipping my mind right now that you could probably just plug in.
The last thing that the last couple of things he did were Carolyn Tuesday and being the director for the More music video for Flying Lotus.
I didn't know he directed a music video. Makes a lot of sense. Plays right into his strengths.
And both of those were in 2019. And even though he's listed as creative director for Blade Runner Black Lotus, I think that's a situation much like with Macross Plus, where he was involved in the direction, but he wasn't the guy. The guy with Runner Black Lotus was Shinji Aramaki. And I don't count. And even though he was, like I said, he was a musical advisor for Sonny Boy, that was just being an advisor on a project is saying a whole lot. Because yeah, you give out tips, but how much of tips are actually used?
He was advisor on the Bebop live action too, and obviously that didn't amount to much. That said, I'm sure like the Blade Runner guys probably listened to him a fair bit more than Netflix did.
I think his attitude of the whole thing is quality over quantity. And because the funny thing about Bebop is because of how sensitive some of the higher ups were at that time, Bebop almost got canceled in Japan. And in fact, I'm pretty sure the reason that Toonami even got a hold of it was because of the fact that if you look at a lot of the anime in that first block of Toonami, a lot of the stuff that was in it considered castaways in their run in Japan. Cowboy Bebop, like I said, almost got canceled. Almost got going to be 12 episodes, and I'd say it has a much bigger foot here in the States and in the West in general than it did in Japan. Big O bombed in Japan,
which is a shame because I love the Big O so much.
I do too. But keep in mind that it was Cartoon Network who pushed for the second season.
It didn't like the second season to that get released in the West before Japan, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, because Cartoon Network producing that as well as producing IGPX at the same time.
Slightly off topic. I don't know if there's an anime out there with a more mismatched show and opening song than the Big O.
I can raise you one, Berserk.
Alright, that's up there too. Big O's still pretty bad in that regard.
It is Invoking Queen, and thus I can't hate it.
Oh, I love the opening for Big O, but just it should not be the opening for the Big O. That said,
I didn't hear you denying that it's Invoking Queen.
Look, I'm alright with that. It's a great song.
But then of course there was Gundam Wing, which did all right, but in Japan, but didn't do nearly as well as because this was the early days of the whole alternate universe approach, since they felt that they had done all they could at the time with Universal Century. If only they knew.
Yeah, in relation though to like the Bebop nearly getting canceled, it was another thing I saw Watanabe talk a fair bit about. He was initially told, look, you can make any kind of show you want, but we want to be able to sell like space figurines, so you have to have like space shit in the show. He's like, alright. He produced Bebop and they're like, we can't sell these figurines. So the initial funders for Bebop dropped the project. Somebody else picked up like funding the animation because they were kind of desperate to get a hold of anything new that they might be able to put out. And Watanabe seems a little smug at the sheer volume of merch sales of the Swordfish and Hammerhead there'd been. So yeah, tell me these designs won't sell.
I can't say I blame.
I mean, the design for the Swordfish is awesome. That's my favorite ship in Bebop. The Bebop itself is great too, but nah, Swordfish.
I no love for the Red Tail.
Which one was Red Tail? Was that one Phase?
Yeah.
Look, Red Tail's also great. Hammerhead's great. Hammerhead was the name of Jets, right?
Yeah.
I think it only gets mentioned like once in the series, but yeah, Swordfish is the best.
I mean, I'm not disagreeing. I just have to take this.
Yeah.
And even with all of that, it is kind of amusing that you mentioned we want something that'll sell figurines, because the thing that helped save the anime scene and helped it continue to develop was actually deals with music companies rather than toy companies.
Yeah, because
This is something I kind of brought up when we were talking about Mecha, because it was toy companies as well as model kits that really that helped save things, which is why I will insist that Mecha is the disrespected genre of anime.
I don't know why people shat on Mecha for a while there. It was so weird to me. But yeah, soundtracks. You didn't see soundtracks selling for things that weren't anime here in the West like you did. You didn't see like soundtracks being sold for our animation stuff like Transformers. You didn't really see Transformers CDs everywhere. You saw anime soundtracks though. Even for anime that weren't that big, you saw anime soundtracks.
Yeah, and I've got a good handful of them.
Now, we pretty much covered anything I was looking to talk about for Watanabe. Is there anything else on the table you wanted to bring up?
I will note it is kind of funny that I've had a bit of a run that if you work with enough steps on a certain director, eventually you will find yourself at Lupin. And Watanabe is no exception because for the woman called Fujiko Mine.
Let's see, we talked to Miyazaki, who, yeah, he's definitely had a hand in Lupin.
Yeah,
Now I'm wondering if Cone at some point had something to do with something Lupin related, or if maybe he didn't just have a long enough career for that to have happened.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I can develop.
I've always heard 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Oh, that I know that I did a challenge once, wanted to see if I could have Superman beat Kevin Bacon at his own game by tying anything back to Superman.
I don't think so, but I'm sure it was a very good, very close call. But I think Bacon wins out on that one. All right, though, with that said, I guess we'll wrap this episode up. It's always fun talking about great anime directors. And, well, it's going to be like, I don't remember if I mentioned this last stream, but it's the last Saturday of the month we plan to record these and stream these. So I guess
that's the general plan.
So I guess we'll see everybody the last Saturday of July for the next episode.
Stay frosty.